All right, so we'll get started. We have an action-packed hour here, talking with both Amy and Robert. They're happy to go on about 15 minutes beyond 2. We have a lot of good information to share. But welcome to the 4th day of the Virtual Watershed Congress. We're happy to have you all here, and we're happy to have our presenters. You're in the Understanding, Communicating, and Addressing Municipal Climate Change Challenges. Without further ado, I am going to hand it off to Robert and Amy, both with the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, both wonderful professionals, and we're really happy to have you both here to talk to us about the biggest issue facing all of us. So thank you for being here to you both. Go ahead, Robert.
Great, thank you. I'm Rob Graff from the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. Let me just give it the agenda in brief here. Thank you, Faye, for that introduction and putting this in the context of the Watershed Congress as a whole. We're going to be giving first with an overview of climate change in our region and its impact on municipal operations. And then I'll be followed by Amy, who will be talking about coastal effects of climate change in southeastern Pennsylvania. And then, as Faith noted, we're going to have time for questions and discussions that Faith will help moderate. As we originally planned this as a in-person meeting, please bear with us as we deal with the issues of being on a webinar. So first I'm going to give a couple polls to see who's actually on the webinar. I'm going to try to please answer these as quickly as you can so we don't spend too much time on them. The first question, which I'm launching right now on your screen, asks you, so if you click on the one that matches you, what best describes your organizational affiliation? So please click on that, and if it's something other than this, please put that in the chat and I'll look there for it. Okay, we have about a little over half the people have entered. Okay, okay, so it seems like it's stabilized at about 3/4 of the people answer, so I got 4 seconds left before I end the polling. All right, so I'm going to end the polling and show the results. So you can see that most of you are with nonprofits or environmental organizations, and some interested and engaged citizens, and some university folks, and a couple from a consulting business. Great, so now let me see, how do I do the next poll? I think I stop this and I go to the second question, which is a little bit more about you. So where are you actually from? If you could again answer these quickly, that would be great. And there's 2 questions, where you're from, and then the second part of this is how familiar you are with DVRPC. So I believe you should be able to scroll down and see that on your screens now. All right, we've got about 1/3 of the people, about half the people now. I want to get at least to say 3/4 before we stop this, so I can get a sense of who the audience is so we know how much time to spend on certain issues. Oh, and there's also familiarity with the Watershed Congress. I forgot that question was there, so it slipped off the bottom of my screen. So this is how many have been to other sessions and so forth, which would be of particular interest to Faith, I believe. All right, so I'm going to end this polling and we'll share the results with you. So most people are from southeastern Pennsylvania, but outside of Philadelphia, a couple from New Jersey, and at least one person from outside Philadelphia or New Jersey, and let's see what they say. Okay, so someone's not seeing the poll. Sorry about that, Megan. And someone's from the Bucks County Conservation District in Doylestown, and someone's from Maryland. Great. And you can see most of the people are familiar with DVRPC, but I'll pass on a little bit of time talking about us, not much, one slide. And then most people have been to either a previous Watershed Congress or the current one, or both perhaps. All right, and then the final poll I want to do is for today's, whoops. Close this, okay, why isn't it showing up? Well, it doesn't have to. Oh, that's to stop the results. Great, and then the final question is, for this webinar, which is on understanding, communicating, and addressing municipal climate change challenges, which are the areas that most interest you. And you can check any that you want. And this will help both me and Amy sort of focus our comments. Which will be very helpful as we go through today. Since otherwise you'd be in the room and I could see that you are rolling your eyes at certain parts or really rapt attention at others, would help me know how to do it more deeply in whichever ones. So, so most people have voted. I'll give it another 10 or 15 seconds. And then we'll stop all the polling after this. All right, excellent. So, so as you can see, which is a good thing, because this is what we're going to be talking largely about, is how do we prepare for the impacts of climate change. There's only a couple people who are interested in what causes climate change, so I will skip through those slides rather quickly. I have about 3 slides on that. And then talking about the impacts on the coast, Amy will be talking about that. And then in the chat, someone said other, but didn't say anything yet in the chat, so we can, we'll have to wait for that, but I'll keep my eye on that. All right, excellent. So as we noted, this webinar is being recorded and the slides will be available after the webinar. I'll be giving them to the Watershed Congress for circulation. Your microphones are all muted by default, so we don't hear dogs and tractors and garbage trucks and work in the background. Please use only, you'll see there's 2 ways you can enter information. There's a chat and there is a, oh, I see the additional question there, so thank you. Please use a chat only to message everyone, or panelists use only the Q&A box to ask questions, because that's the only place we'll be looking at it. And you should be able to find the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you can't, keep looking. And also please be patient with the quirks of Zoom. I'm giving Amy permission now to interrupt as needed if she notices something going awry that I need to take care of. All right, so the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission is the metropolitan planning organization for the 9 counties of Greater Philadelphia. We're a bi-state agency through an agreement between Pennsylvania and New Jersey. We're called the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission because the Delaware River forms the boundary between Pennsylvania and New Jersey. The state of Delaware is outside of our region. And our board is made up of mostly elected officials in the counties, the cities, and those representing the governments of both sides of the river. We're fortunate to have a staff of over 120 with a wide range of activities. I work for the Office of Energy and Climate Change Initiatives, where we work both to understand how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and how to prepare the region for the long-term impacts of climate change. I realize I did not provide an introduction to the Office of Environmental Planning where Amy works, but I'll leave her to do that when she speaks. I have 3 slides to talk about climate change really briefly. So briefly, the Earth's surface temperature is warmer than the cold space that surrounds it because the atmosphere holds in some of the sun's heat. The atmosphere also moderates the temperature change between night and day. Think of you being in a cold room. If you have the right blanket on, you can be comfortable. If the blanket's too thick, you'll start to get too hot and sweaty. The blanket for the Earth is made up of greenhouse gases, primarily carbon dioxide. The higher the concentration of greenhouse gases, the thicker the blanket and the warmer the Earth's surface. In this illustration, the level of the water in the bathtub essentially represents the thickness of the blanket. You can see the various major sources of CO2 at the top of the slide here: fossil fuel emissions, plant and animal respiration, and volcanoes. Before humans started burning fossil fuels to heat our homes, generate electricity, move vehicles, cook food, make steel, and so forth, the concentration of CO2 stayed below 300 parts per million. Current life and societies developed in the temperature range that a blanket of this thickness provided. We chose what crops to plant where to locate cities, what forests adapted to create a mix that was appropriate for the climate. And this system was largely in balance until about the mid-1880s. Then the blanket got thicker and the Earth started to warm as we started to burn fossil fuels. And when this graphics was put together, the concentration of CO2 concentration was 403 parts per million right here, but it's today over 410 parts per million and rising quickly. So as you can see, there's currently about, or at the time this slide was made, there was 9.8 billion tons of carbon dioxide coming into the system, into the atmosphere, and 5.5 billion tons going out, which meant mostly in soils and plants and in the oceans. And the ocean is becoming increasingly less able to absorb CO2, and that's becoming more acidic. And the plants and soil are slowing down because we're clearing forests or they're burning. And so we have this increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And here it just shows that same information graphically. The dark blue line shows the amount of emissions in billions of tons per year, which was essentially zero to the mid-1850s. And this line shows the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, and you can see how it's gone from under 280 parts per million to close to about 410 parts per million now. So that's my introduction to climate change. Oh, one more. So the global temperature during this, between 1880 and now, has gone up from an average of about 57 degrees, a little under 57 degrees Fahrenheit, to up about 1.5 degrees to 58 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm reading the things here. Okay. So we'll be talking today about four selected DVRPC climate change resources. You can find all of these through the DVRPC Energy Climate website with that URL. First, I'll talk about our regional energy use and greenhouse gas emissions inventory, briefly show a web-based map for municipalities, and spend a lot of the time today talking about how to manage municipalities in a changing climate. And then Amy will talk about the coastal effects of climate change on southeastern Pennsylvania. So DVRPC has done, hang on a second. In order to track progress towards the greenhouse gas reduction goal that DVRPC has of 50% by, or 80% by 2050, as well as shape and inform energy use and greenhouse gas emission reduction policies, we periodically inventory estimated energy use and greenhouse gas emissions for the region. Our most recently completed inventory was for 2015. It followed previous inventories for 2010 and 2015. We will shortly be working on our inventory for 2020, although we may use some 2019 data because COVID has made 2020 somewhat of an oddball. Altogether in our region, energy use accounts for about 80 or 90% of all regional emissions, all of which comes from burning fossil fuels. All of the energy emissions come from burning fossil fuels. Thus, it's very important for energy efficiency and renewable energy are very important for controlling greenhouse gas emissions. This chart shows the primary causes of the emission changes between 2010 and 2015. The primary causes for the decrease in emissions over this 5-year period were a shift in fuel use for fuel use mix here for both electricity generation and a move away from heating oil to natural gas in home heating. And the electricity generation, mostly that's due to replacing, essentially all of that's due to replacing coal with natural gas. And there's also been an important decrease in on-roads emissions per mile, which is due to national fuel efficiency standards. So you can see that those are the main causes for the changes in our emissions in the region. And this is a really great tool available on our website. Let's hope it works here. Let's see. So on our website, accessible through our website, we can visit any municipality in the region. I think this was originally supposed to take place in person in Pottstown. So if I click on the map on Pottstown, it will provide me a 4-page energy and emissions profile for the borough with how much energy was used in the various sectors, how much money was spent on energy, assuming what gas prices and electricity prices were at the time, and then the greenhouse gas emissions per sector and where they came from, and then some details. As I said, it goes into quite a bit of detail over 4 pages. So that's available for all the municipalities in the region. And I need to get out of that. Great. So this map shows the emissions per acre by municipality in our region. And not surprisingly, the emissions per acre are greater in Philadelphia, where a lot of people and a lot of economic activity takes place. You can see also that they're greatest in the various, there's Trenton, I believe that's Norristown and Media and Westchester. So the county seats and places where there's Pottstown here, places that are sort of concentrated populations naturally have more emissions per acre. However, if you look at that a different way, by emissions per person, per capita, and per job, sort of based on sort of economic activity, you'll see that those places that are more walkable, have mixed use neighborhoods, near transit infrastructure, and with smaller houses tend to use less energy and produce lower emissions per capita. In this case, the greener a place is, the lower its per capita emissions. So you can see, for instance, here that, again, Norristown here now shows up as quite green in lower emissions per capita, and it's not a completely clear coordination. So, or correlation. So I'm going to change topic here to municipal management in a changing climate. Let me just see what's in the chat. Okay, nothing much. We'll wait for you to get your Q&A. Recently DVRPC, actually it was about 2 years ago, put out a publication, a 36-page publication that presents an overview of current and projected changes to the climate in Greater Philadelphia and how those changes are expected to affect the region, and what operational changes municipalities might want to consider to best serve their residents and businesses in the light of these changes. This is available on our website. However, because I was planning to do this when we were going to do the Congress in person, if you'd like one or more hard copies, please email me at the email address there, which will be at the end as well, your name, organization, and a mailing address with the number of copies you would like, and I'll be mailing those out in a few weeks. So please feel free to do that. Hang on. Okay. So in 2015, Philadelphia put out a publication for their Office of Sustainability called Growing Stronger. And its summary for the climate in the region is warmer and wetter. So you can read this here yourself, essentially more rain and more snow, and that'll be challenging to our infrastructure in the region. So now I'll give a brief overview of our region's historic climate, what's happened here. So as we noted before, the global temperature has increased significantly, and you can see a pretty clear pattern here, which follows the pattern of increases in greenhouse gas emissions. And then you also see that the region has followed a very similar trend. This is southeastern Pennsylvania and southern New Jersey. The trend line there shows the average. Precipitation hasn't changed very much over this period. There's not a real strong change, maybe a slight upward trend. But more of this precipitation in recent years has come in the form of intense storms, although this is also something difficult to analyze. So our projected climate in our region, it's a little bit, this projected climate is going to present the region with some serious challenges. Some of the information may surprise you or may not. But essentially, the future, what's the future predicted to bring us? Our current global temperature is just over 1 degree Fahrenheit above the global average for the 1960 to 2000 baseline. Increasing global temperatures are projected for the remainder of this century, even if we were to stop emitting all greenhouse gases today, which is the bottom line in this graph. We would see another ½ degree or so of temperature rise. However, unfortunately, we all know that emissions are going to continue to rise, which will drive the global temperature higher. Higher temperature means higher energy in the atmosphere and thus more dynamic weather. Future global temperatures depend on our current and future greenhouse gas emissions, and greenhouse gas emissions depend on human choices, activities, and technological change, all of which are difficult to predict. Our work focuses on two scenarios, which we call optimistic and pessimistic. The optimistic scenario is one with significant policy interventions and technological advances, and the pessimistic one is essentially the track we're on now. As you can see from this chart, and we'll see in the coming charts, a lot of what happens in the future depends on what we do today to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. The average annual temperature in the region is projected to continue to rise over the remaining of the century by about 3 degrees Fahrenheit under the optimistic scenario, and about 8 degrees Fahrenheit under the pessimistic scenario. So this is a somewhat complicated graph, so bear with me as I explain it. So we have 3 different colors here: 90 degrees, 95 degrees, 100 degrees, and 105. And these are represented on the chart. So here in the 1961 to, the 1999 baseline, the region averaged over averaged 20 days per year with a temperature of 90 degrees or greater. Note that this year we had 31 days over 90, assuming we don't have any more. This shows that in that period of time, we've typically had about 4 days with a temperature of 95 or greater, and then 1 day per every 4 years with a temperature of 100 degrees or greater, and essentially no regular days over 105. So by the end of the century, the region will average, so that's down here, 2081 through 2099, will average anywhere between 51 days to 98 days with a temperature 90 degrees or greater. And this range here represents the difference between the optimistic scenario, if we start controlling greenhouse gas emissions, and the pessimistic scenario, which is if we sort of continue with business as usual. And we will expect anywhere between 15 and 54 days a year with a high of 95 degrees or greater, again, depending on emissions between now and the end of the century. And anywhere from 2.5 to 16 days a year with a high of 100 degrees or greater, again, depending on the actions we take now. And a range of anywhere from 1 day every 3 years to 3 days per year with a temperature expected over 105, again, depending on our success in reducing emissions. Another thing that will happen is there are going to be many more hot summer nights, making life without air conditioning increasingly unbearable. High nighttime temperatures don't allow air conditioning systems to have downtime and can also result in much higher cooling bills. Isn't this optimistic? So total precipitation is expected to increase just slightly under both scenarios by about a total of 5 inches or so over the period of time, over the century. But in both scenarios, both the optimistic and pessimistic scenarios, most of the additional precipitation is expected to occur in the winter months and the summer months, with the fall getting slightly drier even. Warming temperatures cause several changes as well in water, in sea level rise. So water expands as it gets warmer when land ice melts. Let me start over. Water expands as it gets warmer, and when land ice melts, it raises the level of oceans. The sea level changes for other reasons than warmer temperatures. Ocean currents can change and the land can rise or fall. Also, the impact of climate change on ocean currents is pretty complex, but it appears as if these changes will further exacerbate climate or sea level rise. In addition, increased sea levels result in storm surge associated with coastal storms going further inland. And of course, not all coastal challenges are due to sea level rise. Barrier islands that we've built on have always changed in response to storms and wave actions. Amy will go over this in more detail in her discussion later, but just briefly, since 1900, The sea level rise in the Delaware estuary has risen by just about a foot, and by 2100 is expected to rise 3 or 4 feet versus 2000, 3 feet with no additional greenhouse gases and 4 feet under the pessimistic scenario. Of course, this all depends on what happens to the ice in Greenland and Antarctica. So I think that one perspective that has been raised that someone I was reading recently is that don't think about the future as getting hotter. Think about this as the coolest year in the for the remainder of the century. This is the good old days today, and it's going to only get warmer from here. So for municipalities, sort of what can we do? There are 3 responses to climate change that we can do, and we're sort of doing all 3. Reduce emissions, prepare for the changes, and then care for those suffering from the impacts of climate change. We must continue and are currently taking all 3 approaches. The focus today, though, is on helping municipalities in our region prepare for the projected changes through making systems more resilient, adapting operations to future conditions, and transforming the way we operate in light of a changing climate. There are actions that municipalities can take to prepare their communities. So municipal facilities are a place to start. Cooling requirements are projected to more or less double by the end of the century. Conversely, heating bills are projected to slightly decrease. So heating and air conditioning systems, as well as building design, should take into account the temperatures that are projected over the lifetime of the equipment in the building. Drainage requirements for buildings, parking lots, etc., and recreation fields are likely to increase due to more intense, oh, I just dumped a bunch of water on the ground. Due to more intense storms. Places that have water problems today will only get worse. Properly designed gutters, downspouts, swales, and green stormwater infrastructure are all important. Shade from trees and shelters will be required at outdoor recreation facilities. Playing surfaces may need to be redesigned with future temperature and rainfall in mind. And the hours of recreational facility use may need to be adjusted to cooler times, perhaps requiring lights for nighttime use. Municipal pools may wish to extend their seasons and their hours. And water fountains at recreation facilities will be more important than they are today. Stormwater systems will be challenged to handle more intense rainfall. This makes it particularly important to assure that system inlets and outfalls are kept clear of debris. Retention basins, riparian corridor protection, and green stormwater infrastructure all reduce flow and effectively increase the capacity of existing stormwater systems. When reviewing stormwater plans for new developments or redevelopment, future rainfall projections should be kept in mind. Intense storms cause waterways to flow faster with greater volume. Bridges, culverts, and other road-related infrastructure are typically designed for historic storms and may no longer be adequate for current and future storms. In addition to assuring that culverts and passages under bridges are kept clear of debris, municipalities should assure that any replacements are designed for future storms rather than simply replacing in kind with the same design. Pavement surface temperatures can be much higher than air temperature, leading to roads buckling and softening in very high temperatures. As climate change proceeds, municipalities will need to select appropriate pavements. Transit stops of all kinds should be provided with shade where feasible, and sidewalks and trails should be kept shady as well, perhaps by planting and maintaining trees. The timing and method of providing some key municipal services may need to be reconsidered. In hotter summers, trash might need to be collected more frequently or earlier in the morning when it's cool. Municipalities need to consider how foot and bicycle patrol officers will stay cool. Organized summer youth programs might need to have midday times inside, and summer street fairs may need to have cooling centers or be provided or be moved to cooler times of the year. Work rules and contracts may need to be reviewed in preparation for hotter weather. Work hours may need to be shifted to avoid the hottest part of the day during summer months. And then doesn't this picture just make you feel cooler? Trees keep people and buildings cool in the summer. They can also be part of green stormwater infrastructure, and when properly planted, they can serve as windbreaks to reduce both heating and cooling requirements for buildings. And they absorb and store carbon dioxide. But as our climate changes, it is important to be sure that the trees planted are suitable for the conditions they are projected to face over their lifetimes. The DVR publication and website contains links to excellent resources on conducting a street tree survey and on selecting trees for projected future conditions. Climate change presents a number of public health challenges. Extreme heat may require municipalities to provide cooling centers, and we're putting out a publication on that shortly. Education is needed to avoid vector-borne diseases such as Lyme disease and West Nile virus, and municipal pest management and education for residents such as eliminating standing water may be needed. Municipalities can work with their county planning officials to update their floodplain ordinance in light of both sea level rise and increased rainfall intensity. Zoning strategies can help protect assets from flooding, for instance, by requiring setbacks from rivers and streams, increased base flood elevations for buildings, and proper stormwater management. And municipalities are able to impose building requirements beyond code for buildings in floodplains. Each section of the publication contains a list for municipalities, list of resources with links to additional information. There's also a link to county level charts rather than just regional charts. And it also has an additional discussion of coastal municipalities. We've mailed a copy to every municipality in the region with a cover letter, and it's on our website. And pre-COVID, we had a whole set of outreach meetings planned at municipalities where we were going to be playing an interactive game that educates people on the challenges of climate change. And that's all I have. I think we still have time for Amy's presentation, so I will stop my screen. And someone's asking, can I give example of play surface changes? Yeah, so for instance, if you have so I'll stop my screen sharing so Amy can get hers up while I'm answering this question. Yeah, so if you were to have, say, a baseball field that had a lot of puddles in it now, you might need to fix that to make it slope it differently so that it drained correctly. Also, you might want to change your surface for a basketball court to perhaps make it light colored rather than dark colored to reduce the heat. Similarly with skate parks and things like that, you might want to, in addition to providing shade, make sure that the surfaces were painted white or a light color to reduce heat. Thank you. I'll pass the mic on to Amy and we'll have discussion at the end. Thank you.
All right. Rob, can you see my screen? We're all good to go? Okay,
yes, we're all good to go.
Thanks, everybody. So I'm Amy Verbofsky. I am a manager of healthy and resilient communities at DVRPC, and I'm excited to share our coastal effects of climate change in Southeastern PA story map, which is a tool that my colleagues and I put together. I guess it was released about a year ago. And it is an interactive online tool that looks at the impacts of climate change and coastal flooding in the Delaware estuary region. So as a little bit of background, Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection asked DVRPC to work with some of the municipalities within the coastal zone to see what they're doing about climate change and coastal flooding, and if they're thinking about it in the future. And what we found out was that municipalities are dealing with flooding now. It's a problem, but they're not really thinking about the kind of future impacts of sea level rise and what coastal flooding will look like 50 years from now. So we wanted to put together this story map as a tool, to provide them with kind of targeted, tailored information that they could use within their planning documents and programs. So as a little bit of a heads up, I'm going to try and do this basically as a live demo, a walkthrough of the story map. So again, with everything, hoping all the internet's working well for us today. So just scrolling through. We start with a little bit of background information on climate change in Southeastern PA. This is drawn from a lot of the data that Rob just went over. And then we provide a little bit of information on the geography of the Delaware Estuary Coastal Zone. As you can see, it makes composed of 29 municipalities within Delaware, Philadelphia, and Bucks County. So kind of Marcus Hook down in the southern end, all the way up to Morrisville in the northern end up there. And then there are 5 tabs at the top that are really the meat of the story map. And we'll start with our flooding scenarios. We have showing projected sea level rise under 4 different scenarios. So yep, I will scroll down. So we have present day. It'll take a second to load there. 2050, 2100 under a low emission scenario, and 2100 under a high emission scenario. And for each time period, we've mapped the high tide, the 10% storm, and the 1% chance storm. And the 1% chance storm is also known as the 100-year storm. And it is something that we thought a lot of people would be familiar with from the FEMA flood maps and flood insurance. And it's something that they're aware of in the present day. So what does that look like in 2050 and 2100? And I want to note, I guess, that this data, or the data for these layers, comes from the NOAA historical tide gauge at the Philadelphia gauge. And unlike the FEMA floodplain data, it only includes the limited wave action that the tide gauge in its fixed position would collect. So there is not wave run up. There aren't other kind of factors in there as well. And it doesn't include any riverine flooding. And I'm going to scroll down here. As you're going through, you can see this is the 2100 low emission scenario, 2100 high emissions. And then we have a little chart here that I'm going to pull out. So just talking briefly about where we got our data. Our sea level rise estimates are based off of data studies conducted by Dr. Robert Kopp of Rutgers University. In 2016, he published a study called Assessing New Jersey's Exposure to Sea Level Rise and Coastal Storms. And it was based in New Jersey, but it was looking at the tidal Delaware, and it's the same water body whether you're in Pennsylvania or New Jersey, so it worked for our region as well. And the Kopp study provided a range of estimates based on probability. So, for example, there's a 50% chance that sea level will rise by X number of feet. There's a 10% chance that sea level rise will rise by Y number of feet. We use the central estimate, which is the 50% chance for each time period and emission scenario. And the kind of full range of estimates, all the details of that are in, we have a technical document that's linked from the story map that I will mention at the end. And then specifically this graphic here, this kind of shows the actual numbers that we use for our water levels. So this is mean high or high water. We're basically calling high tide for ease. And this is current day. And then you add on, here's the amount of water, the storm surge you'd get from a 10% chance storm. And this is the amount of water from 1% storm. You can see down here, for the 10%, it's 3.5 or 3.05 feet. And for the 1%, it's 4.13 feet of water. And then with 2050 sea level rise, you're adding on an additional 1.4 feet above that mean high or high water. For 2100 low emissions, it's an additional 2.3 feet. And for the 2100 high emissions, it's 3.4 feet. So you're essentially adding about a foot between each of these scenarios. So when you're scrolling through, there isn't a huge difference that you can see on the map because you're just adding a foot within each of the scenarios, but it is still there. And you can scroll around to see, the whole extent. Obviously, the kind of Philadelphia airport here is the most dramatic. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. We have an Explore for Yourself section here where users can go in and turn on and off different layers depending on what they're interested in, what they want to see. Chronic inundation. So chronic inundation is a term that comes from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and it occurs when a land area is flooded 26 times per year, which is an average of every other week. And this is what they determined was basically the time when the land becomes unusable. It's flooded so much that you can't carry on your normal activities. And so we wanted to show chronic inundation because this is the areas that we think communities will expect to see flooding first and where they should probably be focusing some of their efforts now. Let's see, I'll scroll down here. We were able to obtain chronic inundation data from the Union of Concerned Scientists and mapped it within with our sea level rise projections, our different scenarios here. So we have present day chronic inundation, the 2050, what it would look like in 2100, low emissions and high emission scenario. And again, have the map, the graphic to show the different water levels and an explore for yourself option as well. The next two tabs that we have here, infrastructure risk and property value risk, are tabs that we added after we had conversations with the city of Philadelphia. They wanted us to, I guess, overlay some of our sea level rise projections with assets and other things that municipalities are concerned about. So how are these different sea level rise projections going to impact municipalities, different structures, different roads, bridges, and potentially tax base when you're looking at property value. So for the infrastructure tab, I'm going to scroll down a little bit. We picked 3 different sea level rise scenarios and overlaid them with, in this case, vulnerable structures, which are just any kind of building, community assets, so that's hospitals, police stations, schools, I forget off the top of my head, but we have that information somewhere, roadways, and we did it for, again, 3 different kind of scenarios. So 2050 chronic inundation as not necessarily best case, but like the lowest amount of impact as far as inundation. We did a 2100 high emission scenario with chronic inundation as a middle level, and then a 2100 high emission scenario with a 1% chance storm. And that was kind of the greatest impact that we are showing here. And just as an example for this middle ground, the 2100 high emission scenario with chronic inundation, we found that there were 97 miles of roadway, 97 community assets, and 1,700 structures that were at risk. So this map also, you can click on it and kind of see what's going on there as well. But one thing I really like about this particular layer is the Explore for Yourself starts to aggregate some of the data at a municipal level, or if you're in Philadelphia, I believe it's the zip code. So I'm going to go down here and turn on percent of total roads at risk with a 2100 high emissions and the 1% chance storm. So this is the most extreme scenario that we're showing. But if you zoom out a little bit, I'm going to click over here on Tinicum Township, I believe. Come on, there we go. And under this scenario, we found that about 50% of all of Tinicum's roadways could be underwater with this given scenario. So things that municipalities would want to be thinking about, because I mean, that's obviously pretty severe. The property value risk tab is set up the same way as the infrastructure risk as far as the 3 different scenarios. And it's just looking at assessed value. So as far as tax base is concerned, for that middle ground, the 2100 high emissions with chronic inundation, we found that $920 million in property value would be at risk of being inundated in this scenario. This is within the Delaware Estuary Coastal Zone region. Again, the Explore for Yourself. This again is selected for that 2100 high emission scenario with the 1% storm. And I'm going to click on the Navy Yard here. So this is showing us that under that scenario, 60% of all of the property value within the Navy Yard, that 19112 zip code, is at risk of being inundated. And that's a total value of $132 million. If we look a little bit up here, this is kind of Old City, Philadelphia. It's only just over 4% of the total property value, but it's actually $222 million worth of property that would be inundated. So definitely, things to consider, and I think starts to make a case for why we need to be addressing these coastal flooding impacts now. The last tab talks about our community rating system, and we wanted to include it again because it was something DEP was interested in, but also because it's a potential tool that municipalities have to address some of the impacts of flooding today and into the future. So I don't know if folks are familiar with the CRS program, but it's a voluntary program to incentivize municipalities to implement floodplain management activities that exceed the minimum National Flood Insurance Program requirements. So it's a little tricky, but municipalities participate in CRS, and that reduces the flood insurance premiums for their policyholders. So again, municipalities participate, the policyholders, the residents that live within the community that have flood insurance, they would see savings on their flood insurance policies by up to 45%. It kind of depends on the level that the community achieves, so how much they do to reduce their flood risk. And so we wanted to show municipalities what their policyholders can save if they were to participate in the program. So first we wanted to look at, we're going to click on average insurance premium. So this is just, let's get a sense of what people are currently paying in flood insurance and how many people have flood insurance. So for the city of Philadelphia, the average premium per policy is $953 per year. Good amount of money, and there are about 3,800 people in Philadelphia that have flood insurance. I should note that this is the number of people that have flood insurance, not necessarily the number of people that should have flood insurance. That's something we want to find, but we have not been able to kind of get that realm of data just yet. As a comparison, we have Marcus Hook, where only 4 people have flood insurance, or there's only 4 policies, but the average premium is about $3,000, so substantial amount of money. And then I'm going to scroll down here. So we also have these fun maps, these little slider maps. There we go. That start to show us, this one takes a second, kind of the savings that people could have if the community was to enroll in the CRS program. So CRS has level classes from 9 to 1, and 9 is kind of entry level, and you policyholders can save about 5% under class 9 and up to 45% in class 1. So here in Philadelphia, the average savings would be $53 per year on eligible policies, and that's class 9. Again, that's kind of entry level, and class 1 is very hard to achieve, but the savings would be $450 on average per eligible policyholder. Let's see if I can go over back to this. That's kind of it for the story map, but I do want to note we have our about our analysis document, a technical document that details, again, where we got all of our, the methodology for our sea level rise projections, the limitations of the model, lots of really fun reading. So if you're interested, it is all there. And I think that is it for me. So I guess I can go ahead and stop sharing, or Faith, if you wanted to do, you have time for Q&A?
Yes, we do have time for Q&A, and I see a couple questions have come in under Q&A, and please just go ahead and type in questions as well if you have them in either the chat or the Q&A. First question is from Jay. He asks, what municipal policy is the most impactful to limit the lesson and the effects of climate change locally? And a follow-up is, does the DVRPC only suggest policy changes, or are there any mandates other than MS4?
Yeah, so I'll take a crack at the first one of those. It really somewhat depends on the municipality as to what policy is most effective to lessen the effects. I would say stormwater management is extremely important, particularly as we have more intense storms. I think all of us felt the storm on August 4th, I believe it was, that really, we had a couple of storms in August, I think, that really turned our streets into rivers. I live in Haverford Township. I live in an area that's fortunately well drained, but we had lots of people who had their basements filled with water, which is a bigger problem than having an inch or two. And also it can take out bridges. We've had storms take out bridges, and we've had storms take out out, banks of rivers and so forth. So managing stormwater, which is really two things. One is making sure, well, it's a complicated. First, you want to try to manage stormwater as much where it falls. The city of Philadelphia's Green Cities Clean Waters program tries to manage the first inch of stormwater on site, essentially, before it gets into the stormwater system. So that can be done with rain gardens, local retention basins, bioswales, and so forth, making sure that you have a lot of trees that can absorb water that when it falls, and then also making sure that your stormwater system infrastructure is sized correctly and kept clean, so that water can enter from the street easily rather than go down the street, and then also that the outfalls into the receiving waters are unclogged. So there's a lot of maintenance involved. But it is challenging because these systems were often designed for much lower flows than currently. So the key is when you start replacing a culvert under a road or so forth, or replace a bridge, raise it to meet what you expect future flows to be. That, and I think also, I also think that like doing a street tree survey and making sure you have street trees that will survive. This is a very tough time for trees, both with the various pests which attack trees as they get weaker, and also just as we have longer periods of drought and heavy rain to make sure the species are selected. And there's guidance in the document on how to do a street tree inventory, be a good sort of local project. Even I could imagine even a high school class or something getting involved in doing that. Amy, do you know anything about the MS4? That's not my area of expertise at all.
I'm definitely not an expert. I mean, that, I guess my answer to that was DVRPC doesn't have any legal land use authority. So, we don't have any authority to implement policy changes. That needs to happen at the municipal level, a lot of times with land use or zoning, or the state mandates, which is what the MS4 is looking at. Those are state mandates, state requirements. So unfortunately, DVRPC does not have legal authority to mandate anything with regards to climate change policy. We do try to work with municipalities to have them make the changes to their zoning codes or other kind of things that have a little more teeth, I guess.
Let me also ask a question. I'll get back to Jay's third question, but also Bethany asked a question on, are these tools available for municipalities outside of DVRPC? Well, if you mean, are these tools available for municipalities in the region to use? Absolutely. The tools only, however, cover, well, particularly the tool that the inventory only covers the DVRPC region. There are other, and then the tools that Amy presented covers the coastal communities in southeastern Pennsylvania, the coastal communities on the Delaware estuary, of which there are many that have some coast. We've done other work in New Jersey as well on the coast, the estuary coast, although not quite as detailed as that, or more detailed, but for fewer municipalities, I guess. And then we've done other work that covers larger areas than just the region. But these tools are available on our website for municipalities in the DVRPC area. And either Amy or I would be happy to talk about how we develop them for our region if you want to. So just contact us via email or via the DVRPC website.
And I believe, I'm going to blank on it, Rutgers, I think, released a web tool that's for kind of sea level rise and coastal impacts for the entire state of New Jersey. So it was something that we said we didn't need to replicate their work because they've already done great work. So there are other tools out there that do similar things for the New Jersey side.
Yeah, plenty of tools out there for all over the country. I don't know, Amy, with a Union of Concerned Scientists, do they have tools? There's lots of tools out there, and you can contact us and we can direct you to some websites that have sort of tools that are at the national level.
Right.
And then I see one other question here from Jay. Would an initiative such as the Green New Deal or a public voluntarily investing in renewable residential power generation drastically change your projections, making them better than your optimistic projection, making the 2050 goals more like 2030 goals? Well, this is a tough question, and we get asked this a lot, or questions like this a lot. And the challenge is because you know the atmosphere is global, and what someone puts in or does not put into the atmosphere here affects the entire atmospheric concentration of CO2. So if all nations and all people were to do things to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, it would certainly move us towards the optimistic scenario. And that's what all the goals of, say, like the Paris Agreement and other things like that, and the Green New Deal are hoping to do, both in our country and elsewhere. One of the challenges, of course, is if one country emits a lot of emissions, it affects everyone. But I think that, you know, there's some optimism. Certainly, we've had our electricity has gotten cleaner in the US and throughout the world. It's getting cleaner for two reasons. One is a move toward to cleaner fossil fuels when fossil fuels are burning, and also a move towards renewable. And then, somewhat controversial, one of the issues in Pennsylvania is 40% of our electricity in our region comes from nuclear power, which, although it has many environmental problems and impacts and national security impacts, it has essentially zero greenhouse gas emissions. So as our nuclear plants retire, it's important that they be replaced with renewables rather than with natural gas, because if they're replaced with natural gas, our electricity will simply have higher carbon content.
To answer Bethany's question down here, I mean, I think, Bethany, when we were talking to, it was City of Philadelphia employees with...
Can you read the question?
Oh, sorry, yeah. It says, how can municipal employees convince decision makers to prioritize climate adaptation practices and citizens? You know, that question was kind of one of the reasons why we included the infrastructure risk and the property value risk tab. We were having a conversation with City of Philadelphia employees, you know, municipal staff, and saying, like, how, you know, we need to convince the elected officials, city council, why this is important, and that, you know, basically, you know, money speaks. And so how can we show them in more tangible ways the infrastructure, the municipal facilities, police stations, hospitals, and just within your tax base, what's going to be at risk? Like, this much of your tax base could be underwater. You know, you would have no tax base there in those situations. So we included those as a way to start that communication with, you know, in a way that might speak to some decision makers a little bit more.
And then I see a couple questions that actually came in through the chat rather than into the Q&A. One is, how can local tree tender groups help incorporate climate into planting native trees and encouraging people to plant native trees on their property? Are there regional grants to assist for tree tenders, to assist tree tenders? Well, the first part of that question is a little complicated. We had speakers, if you go onto our website, you will see we have a regular, what we call the Climate Adaptation Forum. And I believe the very first one, I think it was October 2017, you can find it on our website, Climate Adaptation Forum, was on trees and the changing climate. And one of the things that's interesting is that the state of Pennsylvania, which up till now has always required that funds can only be used to purchase native trees, is somewhat changing, or at least considering changing that policy to assure that it can purchase trees that will survive in the Pennsylvania climate over the next 100 years, right? So many of the tree species that are native to Pennsylvania are not suitable for the future climate. And so they're looking at trees that may be native to climates that are now similar to the climates we'll have here in the future, to determine whether they should be brought in. And it's a little different than being an invasive species, or it's quite a bit different than being an invasive species, because these are species that are native to the US, but they're native in, you know, south of here generally. In some cases, they're finding single native species in particular pockets of Pennsylvania that are actually going to be more appropriate for the whole state, and trying to promote those. As far as tree tenders, I don't know, you know, as I said, we have a staff of 120, and I don't know exactly what the tree tender, I know we work with tree tenders and we support that process, but I believe that's all primarily done through the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, although they would probably be a better place to ask the question about grants. Amy, do you have any insight on that?
I mean, I'm sure there are more grants than I know about. I know the Pico Green Region grants, which happen every year, will support tree plantings. Actually, last year they had one that was specifically for tree plantings, but their annual grant will fund trees, and there's I guess Penvest has tree planting grants as well. So there are grant programs out there that do support tree plantings.
And then there's one more question in the chat. How can we ensure mature trees in crowded areas like Delaware County are preserved? Can the Planning Commission help in the Darby watershed to ensure headwater areas under threat are preserved as public forests and open space? This would also give us in the crowded areas places to recreate. A great need, especially during COVID, connecting upstream open space with downstream communities. That again is a little outside of my area of expertise. I live in Delaware County, and I know that there's the, I think it's the Darby Creek Watershed Association, but I'm sure whoever's asking that question's aware of that and may even be aware of resources available. Amy, do you have any insight into that as well?
I mean, not really beyond, I mean, DVRPC doesn't have any authority to preserve land. We can work with counties. I mean, a lot of times they target areas for preservation, but you know, most of the preservation that counties are doing, I mean, it's a farmland preservation and not necessarily in Delaware County. I would guess most of the time it would be with a nonprofit, you know, Natural Lands or some other conservation agency that they would partner with to come in and to actually conserve the land. Otherwise, there are shade tree commissions that townships have, and they can help to, you know, support trees within townships.
You can see, I hope you can see mine and Amy's emails on your screen. If you want to email either of us, you know, those questions, we can forward them on to people at DVRPC who may be able to provide, you know, better answers than we have.
Well, this was wonderful to you both. We want to, you know, the time goes fast. It's already 10 after 5, and we thank you for all of your wisdom, and the story map looks great. So we put some of those into the chat.
Thank you. And, you know, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about the story map.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, to join us.